So if any of you guys watch John Oliver, you probably know that the carbon market could improve. My name is Drea Burbank. I'm an MD technologist. I do high tech for hard science. And as my investor recently told me, you go full nerd real quick. So I'm just going to warn you guys, I'm about to go full nerd, and that's why it's on YouTube and not on TikTok. This might also be no bullshit. So here's the carbon market, and here is how it's performed over the last 2 years. Basically, the demand has rapidly escalated, but the supply is not rising as fast as it could to meet it. So let's talk about what's taking so long and why. The carbon market in this case is going to be trees, because trees have already been invented. They're also one of the best things in the world at sequestering carbon, at pulling it out of the atmosphere in the parts per million with which it currently exists. So let's talk about this pipeline if you were to sequester carbon just by trees. So first you plant a beautiful little tree, and then it grows up to be a sexy big tree, and then it sequesters some carbon, and then you do a bunch of science to prove to a certifying body who's independent that you sequestered that carbon, which standardizes the carbon sequestered, at which point it can be transacted on international markets. And the buyers are often companies that have done their best to lower their carbon footprint, let's hope, but they weren't able to quite meet their targets, which would have been net neutral or even net negative. And that's often because that they're in critical industries which can't adjust that fast. So like aerospace, aluminum manufacture, transportation, there's a lot of these. They're doing their best, but given the technology we have today and our efficiencies, they might not be able to totally hit zero. So they can, have a beautiful handshake between the urban and the rural and ask somebody else to sequester carbon for them. So here's all the players in this pipeline, and it's a lot. There are a lot of middlemen. And here's how they work together. In other words, they don't work together at all. In fact, they mostly tend to fight each other every step of the way. So let's talk about that and why it's not working. So first off, nonprofits, governments, and greenwashing initiatives, they plant a lot of trees, but you don't really know what happens to them. Did the trees grow? Did they sequester carbon? Who knows? That means you can't really certify it, and then you can't fund these initiatives using industry or these corporate players that could potentially put more money into the initiative. Oftentimes, indigenous and local people, they might live on the land that was planted, and they might not have been involved in the tree planting or greenwashing initiative. So sometimes, like for example in Brazil, it's happened a few times where the locals will go back in and pull out all the trees after they're planted because they weren't paid and it was their land. Let's say that they're involved and everything's going smoothly. So even if they're doing it all on their own, they might not have the technical or scientific knowledge to prove that there was carbon sequestered in the trees, even if the trees are beautiful and they did a great job. Academics and researchers make absolutely beautiful projects that are tiny and don't scale, and then they publish their findings behind paywall databases. They also news and academics are highly critical of the transaction end of the market. So in overall, the end result has been one of not helping to scale. Web3 has done something typically Web3. They took this entire transaction end of the market and they made a brand new Web3 transaction end. The problem is they didn't involve the certifying bodies who went and invalidated all the credits in the Web3 pipeline. And they also didn't bother to bring the end buyers who mostly don't transact on Web3 right now. They also do a lot of fictional tree planting initiatives, which as far as I can see, have not actually existed in the real world. The certifying body isn't helping a lot either. They take all of their money from the downstream projects, and the more they certify you, the more you have to pay them. So it's not that aligned on end results. They also don't help you at all with the brokering end of it. Brokers, on the other hand, they love to have you as a client, but they take 30 to 90% of the margin. They sell in international markets to international buyers, but these guys often end up totally confused because regulators haven't standardized what a carbon offset is or where you can use it or even what it's used for. And so oftentimes these guys get super confused and don't know what to buy earlier on in the pipeline, assuming that they're doing their best to buy good credits. Overall, the way the current market stands, everybody in the pipeline is sucking money downstream out of the growers. So there's very little incentive to run a tree planting initiative because you pretty much lose money most of the time. So let's talk about why we're different. First off, no middlemen. We don't transact with any middlemen. We do the entire pipeline start to finish. And let me tell you how we do that. We do fair trade carbon credits. So first off, we're a B Corp. We have a US 501c3 nonprofit, which subsidizes our growers to enter the market. These are subsistence farmers in tropical forests. And we have a Delaware C company, which handles purchase and sale of the offsets once they're created. To give you an example of why it's working for us, I'm going to tell the story of Justin Wren, which I just heard last week, and he tells it better. But Justin Wren is an MMA fighter who works in the Congo with Pygmy tribes. And he describes this one day when he went into a tug-of-war against these little guys, and they beat him and dragged him all over the pasture. And the reason was because they were all pulling together. So here's how we pull together to turn the environment and climate change the other direction. So we take all the money that's floating around in the brokerages, and we drop it all back on tree planting. We disintermediate to scale faster and more effectively because we're motivated by turning the dial. We want to win the tug of war. So here's who's pulling on our tug rope. First off, we pay landowners directly. Landowners who live in tropical forests and own the land and have owned the land for a long time. We pay them small amounts of money to grow small amounts of trees on many, many, many small amounts of land. And that adds up to big projects. We also teach them silviculture, and we don't just pay them to plant the trees, we pay them to cultivate them for 1 year. We also pay them to track the trees. And because we use trustless and automated tracking processes like drone scans, machine learning that can be executed on the ground, high-res satellite photogrammetry, and other methods, we can track it faster and more efficiently using the farmers who actually live there. It's then perceived of as a local initiative and a job creator rather than external people coming in to change culture. We also, because we do automated tracking, it makes it faster for us to certify in mainstream bodies like FARA, SustainCert, and Gold Standard. Because they're pretty pragmatic. If you check the boxes, they're happy. We do our own brokering on international markets, and that means that we can take a portion of our revenue and drop it right back on the guy that grew the trees in the first place. Our clients retire credits from us directly. So we only work with clients who are ready and willing to use that carbon credit and are not going to turn around and resell it for a massive profit. So if you want to work with us, you're more than welcome. Put your name here. I want to tell you why we're doing this, because I think the why is probably the most important part, and it explains how we're all pulling in an aligned fashion. So here's where this project was initiated. It's at the very end of a deforestation corridor in the middle of the Colombian Amazon. And this guy, Johnny, has been holding onto his land for 10 years and refused to log it. So here's his land papers, and here's the environmental initiative that he created locally. And here's him talking about becoming an environmentalist. He was not paid for this initiative for about 10 years. I think we were the first ones that came along and paid him for this conservation effort. And here's why we think Johnny is a good partner. Here is species of native jaguar. Here's sentinel species, birds that only come back to undisrupted forests. And here is an endangered bear. He's been taking these videos on his land by himself on his own initiative for 10 years. Johnny is the kind of person that we want to work with, and Johnny is the kind of person that we are working with, and Johnny is the kind of person that we deserves to get paid for conservation. And we believe that his neighbors now see that too. And what we mostly want to do is social proof for somebody like Johnny so that we can reward this behavior and enable it to scale on a much faster pace. So if you want to buy carbon credits from us, we're a Savimbo. We do fair trade carbon credits. And I think you'd be very happy with our incredibly sexy trees and how fast they grow. Thanks.